Whether you agree or disagree that Resident Evil 4 Remake is superior to the original, I think we can all agree on the fact that Resident Evil 4 Remake is a top quality product. It's full of content, the gameplay is superb, the graphics are awesome, the acting's great. Everything from top to bottom is absolutely superb. It is. It blends the survival horror with the action to give us one of the best experiences you can get in gaming, especially in the action horror genre. Now, Resident Evil 4 was never a survival horror game. It was always an action horror game. So what they did here was, I feel like they've pleased the old school fans with some real good atmosphere and scares, but they've also didn't disappoint the new school fans with some really good action horror gameplay. Now, if you look at the RE Engine games in general, you've got Resident Evil 7, 2 Remake, 3 Remake, Village 8, and then you've got the 4 Remake. I felt like Resident Evil 7 served its purpose in bringing Resident Evil back to its roots. The dev team clearly didn't quite understand what it was doing with Resident Evil at the time. They didn't know whether they wanted to be action horror. They didn't know if they wanted to please the survival horror purists. So they kind of tried out different ideas, and what we got was Resident Evil 7. It isn't a perfect video game, but it is a good, very good survival horror experience. Then comes along Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I think perfected the survival horror experience. Much better than Resident Evil 7 in my eyes. Then Resident Evil 3 comes along, and although it is a weak remake of an original game, it did try to inject action back into the formula. So we can see that Capcom, at least the dev team, is kind of up in arms about whether they want to be survival horror, whether they want to be action horror. Then Village comes along, and you can really see the DNA of the original Resident Evil 4 coming back into the franchise. It's a little bit hit and miss, Village. It does some things that I like. It doesn't do it all well. But for the most part, you can see that there's a good idea there. Then Resident Evil 4 Remake hit, and it is perfect across the board. I don't personally think it's better than the original. That could be purely nostalgia talking. I'm not sure what it is, but I can just pick up that original at any point and never ever have to be in the mood for that game. It's just superb. But what I can see is that the Resident Evil 4 Remake is just superb across the board. It does everything so well. And this is peak Resident Evil. The dev team hasn't been able to do this since arguably Resident Evil 4. Now, this could be a good or a bad thing. First, we're going to look at the good. The good is that this game and its design, the way that it flows, is perfect for Resident Evil. You've got your adventure side, you're exploring the environments. You've got your horror side with your great atmosphere. You've got your action side with your great weapons, your ability to parry and melee combat. You can backtrack to find new treasures, which can be sold to upgrade things. I just think the gameplay loop for Resident Evil 4 Remake is spot on. And there is no reason to mess with this formula in the slightest. Now, if they go ahead and they make Resident Evil 5 Remake and they do it like this, and they up the atmosphere and they keep the hub design of this, and they let us do treasures and all this other stuff that the 4 Remake lets us do, Resident Evil 5 could be superb. And then you could do it with 6, and then you could do it for the following games. You could do it with Resident Evil 9. I know we're hearing rumblings about open world design plaguing Resident Evil 9. That could just mean bigger hub areas. It really could. And if it is like that, and we follow the same game formula that Resident Evil 4 brought to the table, I believe we're entering a golden era of Resident Evil. It's going to be superb, left and right. We haven't had a golden era in Resident Evil since it started. Resident Evil 1 came along, Resident Evil 2, 3, Veronica, Remake. I know some people are going to say 0. I don't agree with that. But those first few games, 1, 2, 3, Veronica, remake. There's 5 games there of a golden era Resident Evil. Not much changed between the games. They got the formula right with the first game, and they just tried to do different things, different settings, different set pieces, different bosses, characters, environments. But they all had the same gameplay loop, and it was such a good time to be a Resident Evil fan. Then something happened with Resident Evil. It tried to flip the script, and we got a masterpiece in Resident Evil 4. But Resident Evil 4 then caused Resident Evil 5 and 6, which don't even know if they want to be horror games. Revelations are good, I do enjoy them, but they're still not, I don't know, they're not hitting the stride that Resident Evil 4 did. You know what I mean? They're not comparable. So to see that Resident Evil 4 is once again set up the possibility of a golden era Resident Evil. Resident Evil 5 remake if it happens, Veronica remake if it happens, and Resident Evil 9 could truly be absolutely superb. Or we can look at this in a bad light, and we could look at Resident Evil 4 is permanently cursed to cause a downward spiral of quality in Resident Evil games. And although I like Resident Evil 5, 6, and yada yada yada, I think they're good games. I'd be lying if I didn't believe that the Resident Evil 4 caused some kind of downward spiral with that. Resident Evil 4 Remake could truly cause it as well. What do you think? Do you think we're going into a golden era of Resident Evil games? If you're new here, subscribe. But yeah, that's all I got, people. I'll catch yous later.